I am here. It's Friday night. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, Claire, for coming in on a Friday night. I'm sure there's lots of other things you could be doing on a Friday night, so we're really grateful that you come to see us.
No worries.
Tell us a little bit about Let Me In. Have you got a copy with you?
Yeah.
I'm hiding mine behind my wet head.
Here's one I wrote earlier. So this is my latest thriller. It's about a young couple who decide to sell up and move to darkest Cornwall just after the pandemic. The woman in the couple is a doctor and she's kind of burnt out by what she's been doing, so they want to change. Her husband tells her he's found them the perfect house. She never actually sees the house because she's so busy working. But when she gets there, she has this strange feeling she's been there before. And then they gradually, as they try to renovate the house, they uncover lots of strange secrets and strange items. And they find out that the house belonged to a woman who was supposed to be a witch and also went to prison in the 80s for a triple murder. And so it's kind of designed to be in 4 parts. And at the end of each part, there's a huge twist that hopefully sends the story in a different direction, because both of them have been lying to each other quite a bit, it turns out, about their connection to this house.
It's really interesting. I don't even know where the idea for this kind of book comes from, because it kind of feels like it's rooted in reality. It feels like you're watching this unfold and you're thinking, oh, and there's red flags all over the place for both of them, and they're both kind of tiptoeing around each other. Don't want to kind of don't want to say the wrong thing to each other, not in a bad way. But they're just kind of trying to be considerate of each other.
Yeah, and I wanted to write a story, I think, where a couple are lying to each other, which is so common as a type of crime thriller story. But I wanted it to be because they really love each other, and they do still really love each other, no matter they have both told each other some pretty massive lies, but all the same, they really do love each other. And I wanted that to kind of be a constant, and I wanted hopefully people to be, rooting for them to sort it out somehow.
Definitely rooting for them. Definitely irritated by certain things that they kind of, those moments where you think, right, okay, you can see, trust your gut here a little bit, but I like the fact that they don't, and it is because of this connection that they've got. They are a really lovely couple, despite obviously holding things back. You've got a really lovely couple in the middle of it.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I really wanted it to be that they maybe got together for, turns out to be maybe not the best reasons, but they, it was a real level the same.
I wanted to start with asking why Cornwall. Now, I love Cornwall. I've only ever been once. I feel like I've been a lot, but I've really not. And there's just this feeling, this atmosphere about the place. And I wondered if that, along with the history, is why you chose Cornwall, because there are other places that you maybe could have set the story, but again, maybe wouldn't have had this ethereal atmosphere. There is this thing that runs through the book that it's just kind of ever present, which again, that must be quite a hard thing to do, but we'll come to the writing of it. But is that why you chose Cornwall?
I love Cornwall too, and I didn't go until I was in my quite late 20s. I think it was like 29 or 30 when I went there for the first time. Just kind of fell in love with it, as everyone does, and I've been back quite a few times since, and there's just something really special about it that's hard to put your finger on. And I also discovered that there's quite a strong history of the occult and witchcraft, and people still believe in a lot of superstitions and things. And also think just it's one of those places that people think it'll be so nice to move to. We'll get out of London and it'll be so picturesque, and actually the reality of moving somewhere like that off season can be really difficult. Like, it's got really, really high rates of unemployment and poverty in the people that actually live in Cornwall all year round. So I wanted to explore that a little bit. They have this kind of touchiness all the way through about they don't want people to think of them as being down from London. And we're very keen to stress that, like, they don't have a second home. This is actually their home now, but they're not really ever accepted by the villagers, and for a good reason, it turns out.
It does come across really well that they are not weekenders. They really have to make an effort to be even slightly, for people to just say hello to them, especially when they first move in. They are met with a wall of hostility.
Yeah.
And George might have a clue why, but Helen doesn't know whether he's got a clue why or not, because he was there looking while she was working, as you say.
Yeah.
And that's to move to anywhere and have a a kind of an idea in your head of what it's going to be like before you get there. I mean, she could not have been more wrong about the reception that they were going to get, and she could not
Yeah.
have been more confused by it.
And I think also people think they'll leave London and or a big city and they'll love the countryside, but actually living in the countryside has so many downsides as well. If you're I grew up in the countryside, like very, very rural, and now I live in central London, so I kind of prefer that, but I can certainly still see the attraction of moving to the countryside, but I think it's often harder than people imagine it's going to be.
I think when you're used to all the things that we have in the cities, internet is generally, touch wood, generally quite good.
Mm-hmm.
You can order things, Amazon deliveries. There's a line in the book that
Yeah.
we could order a map, but will it ever get here? Sort of
Yeah, and
thing.
also
So
what I found last time I was in Cornwall was that actually large parts of it don't seem to have any phone reception. So that crime writers, I think, we're always wondering nowadays, like, how do we get around this issue of people have mobile phones if we need to put them in danger? But actually, there's so many like car parks in Cornwall that you have to pay for parking with your phone, and your phone just doesn't work. So it's really frustrating.
never occurred to me that there's so many things that don't. I mean, I don't drive, so that's not one of my things that I ever worry about. There must be a lot of things you can't do without the internet that we've come
Yeah,
to rely on.
especially if you're just used to ordering everything straight to your door, then you're suddenly really lost.
Were you ever tempted to set the book in a different time or erase certain parts of our history? Or was it really important to you to keep some reality running through this story?
You mean with COVID and
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of crime writers have sort of decided that they're just going to skip over the years of 2020 to 2022.
Never
Like set the book
happened.
in 2019 or set it in 2023. But and I didn't want it to play a huge role in it, but it just seemed to make sense to me that that's why she would have moved out of London, was she was a doctor and she was just so burnt out and broken by what she'd been through.
Yeah.
It doesn't really play a huge role apart from that. It's just part of the
Yeah,
fact that
just a little thing of there's the occasional mention of hand sanitizer being available in places. There's not but that I think that was mainly really the nursing home.
Yeah, it's really interesting
Residential.
actually.
Yeah.
How quickly all of that stuff is gone, because I published another book recently that does deal with COVID in more detail, and I kept every time I was editing it, I kept having to update it because it's supposed to be set sort of now or like last year, but things like using hand sanitizer and getting your temperature checked had just so quickly gone away after being such a thing that I was kind of racing to keep up with how quickly it had all been forgotten.
Shall we talk about the other things that you've written? This is it's your first psychological thriller in your name?
No, I've written
No, I've got your other two books that are in. Sorry, I'm thinking of you having other pen names and writing in other
I do.
genres.
So I have a crime series, which is more procedural, set in Northern Ireland. And then I have, let's see, so What You Did was my first psychological thriller. That one did pretty well. The Other Wife, which is, sort of also about moving to the countryside and things going horribly wrong. I have The Push, which is about a murder in an antenatal group. And then I have I Know You, which is about a woman who finds a dead body and instead of reporting it, runs away because she, when she was younger, was accused of murder and actually not just went to prison, but went to death row because she was working in America at the time.
I have not read this one. It sounds right up my street.
Oh, I loved writing that one. I'd been sort of gestating that for years, and then she was a nanny for an American family and was accused of killing them. Got out eventually, moved back to England, changed her name, but then she finds this other body and she sort of starts to realize that maybe someone has tracked her down. And then my last book before this one was Are You Awake, which is about two neighbors. This one does avoid COVID. This one is set in like 2019, I'd say. It's about two neighbors who can't sleep and they meet in the middle of the night in a park and they think they see something violent happening in one of the houses nearby. So they kind of team up. One of them's like a mum with young kids, and the other one's kind of also a journalist, actually, a bit like George, a journalist who's had some trauma. So neither of them can sleep, and they're just like a mismatched kind of like a buddy story of trying to solve this, what they think is a crime and no one else believes is a crime. And then this one. So this would be my sixth, I think, standalone thriller.
It's quite interesting that we've talked about COVID and the pandemic a little bit, but a lot of writers now steer clear of having writers in the books. And I think for a long time it was kind of a big thing. Everyone was writing these books where the main character, the protagonist, the writer, and it was really nice to actually see a writer in a book. I thought that was a really lovely touch that he was a writer, because he needs reasons for all of the research and for his behaviour, and, and that is the perfect reason. And it was just really interesting to see George writing and, holding himself up in his office and tapping away on his computer. It was really nice to see a writer in a book.
I think a lot of writers love writing about writers, and I think you're right. There's a kind of a belief that that's boring. For example, I've just read Yellowface. I don't know if you've read that.
Oh, I've not read it yet. No.
I was really, really fascinated by it, but I was really interested as to how that would read to someone that isn't in publishing, because it's so much about publishing. So that was kind of interesting to me. I think I've got into a bit of a thing of doing it now. So I was a journalist in Are You Awake as well, who was like a foreign correspondent. And then the book I'm writing next is going to be about a writer as well. Because I'm quite interested in the phenomenon of true crime and how it gets sort of narrated and twisted away from the actual truth. And in the book I Know You, the one about the woman that went to death row, all the way through that I have lots of different narratives of like podcasts and books about the case and just documentaries, just everyone trying to comment about the story, and actually nobody knows the truth. Like not even she really knows the full truth. So you find it out eventually, but there's just I'm really interested in exploring our fascination with these cases that are unsolved or solved but in an unsatisfactory way that people are just cannot let go and are obsessed with.
Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons I love crime fiction so much, because true crime, it's harrowing and you don't always get the answers. Sometimes the families really like the story to be told, which, everybody's going to handle it differently. But you've actually dealt with true crime as well with, is it The Vanishing Triangle?
Yeah, so I wrote a non-fiction book about some real life cases in Ireland in the 90s, and they are missing persons cases. So there was not really any evidence to be found. So I couldn't really do that kind of book that's a deep dive into the evidence, because there's just nothing really. It was just all these women that just went missing, and no crime scenes, no bodies, nothing. So that makes it quite hard to sort of speculate. So I kind of tried to instead look at the culture of Ireland in the 90s and think, why was this allowed to happen, and why were they investigated in many cases so badly? Like, why did the police in so many cases just seem to decide they'd just run off or they'd kill themselves or something, even though there was no evidence of that?
Must be really hard to look at an area that you're familiar with and see that this terrible things happened and repeatedly happened, and there's no answer for it. So to be able to write something like that.
I think the most shocking thing about it was just like the lack of coverage. Like I didn't actually hear about these cases until I was researching my own book. So I didn't hear about them growing up in the 90s, even though I would have been in my teens then, and I was used to very clued into the news because I grew up in Northern Ireland. Just never heard anything about any of them. So I don't think they were just sort of forgotten, these women. Like they were just allowed to vanish, and nobody ever said, is there maybe something going on here? Is there a serial killer? Are these even, like, I don't think they even realized they were connected. And some of the families did and said, what about that woman that went missing a few months ago just down the road? And the police just sort of didn't take this in at all.
Laura, hi Laura, has just said The Vanishing Triangle is one of Claire's books in my TBR, I've just noticed.
Okay. Hi Laura.
Well, we can read it together, Laura, because it sounds fascinating.
Yeah, so different to the novel. So it just, like a true crime kind of deep dive into misogyny and violence against women. So pretty harrowing stuff.
So is your next book going to be a psychological thriller, or have you got other things kind of working in the background?
Yeah, so I'm just finishing off the edits on another psych thriller, which is about a group of friends. I love writing about groups. I love writing about groups of middle-class people having terrible things happen to them. So this is about a group of friends who go to a small island off Scotland. And they hire the whole island. It's actually quite easy to do. You can get, particularly in Scotland, there's lots of really small islands with only one house on them. So you can just hire them on Airbnb or whatever. And when they go there, they play the game Two Truths and a Lie. And somebody puts an extra entry into the box that says that they will kill someone and that they're all going to die on silent. So they kind of start to tear each other apart a bit, with wondering, did one of them do this, or is there someone out there with them? And
that is such a good idea.
It's lots of fun to write because they're stuck on silent for the whole book. So, like, what, you know, they sort of, it's a bit, and then there were none, I suppose. So.
Which I'm going to have people shouting, but haven't actually read. Agatha
Oh, it's really good. Yeah, it's real.
It's on my list, just the ever-growing list. How do you manage to fit in reading with it? Do you get sent lots of books and things to look at?
Yeah, so I have a sort of, you can actually see some of it behind me here. I have a sort of a never-ending TBR pile.
I know yours is much tidier than mine. I really need to kind of stand mine up straight and move things around.
Some of those are read, and then some aren't. So I would say I probably have, between physical books and Kindle, I probably have like maybe 40-ish unread books. So one of my plans for the summer was to actually try and clear that, stop buying new books. And I bought 2 books yesterday, so that was a failure. But
never a failure buying new books.
Research, but yeah, I'm going to try and get through all of them. But I'm very happy to give up on a book as well, because I do get sent quite a lot. And I don't really believe in forcing yourself to finish something if you're just not enjoying it. So I will quite happily just give up on things after a few pages.
I've got to say, obviously I get sent books and I buy books to read for the interviews. It's been a really long time. I genuinely can't remember the last book that I didn't finish. It's been a while. I'm really, really lucky with the books that were sent. And obviously, no, I wouldn't name it if I could think of it, but I can't even think of one that I've not finished lately. Not a single one.
Pretty,
so I've had a really good run.
I'm quite trigger happy if I would just give it like 10 pages maybe, even maybe less sometimes. That's just not
I think I'm less likely to give up on a book. I'm more likely to give up on a film or a TV series if that doesn't grab me. There was is it Breaking Bad that everybody raves about? And I did start it, and I might go and look again because I've heard that it's amazing. But I do remember turning it off and putting something else on. But
yeah, actually,
I was in.
I've also only watched the first episode of that, and I don't really know why, because I did think it was good, but somehow didn't grab me. So I watched the first episode of a lot of shows, and then I don't watch the rest of them.
There is a quote on, I think it's your Twitter bio, that says, you're basically a fan of Jessica Fletcher. So a younger, less glamorous Jessica Fletcher. I saved it so I could find it. I am a big fan of JB Fletcher. I did find out that she actually influenced some of my clothing choices.
Yeah.
She really likes these shirts with, or not even sheer, some of them, but with a bow around the neck. And I realised I'd been wearing them, and one day I was watching something, I had an almost identical top on to the one she had on. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, so talk to me about why you're not the less glamorous Jessica Fletcher, but why
she just has kind of the perfect life. I think a lot of authors, like fictional. I'm really interested in like fictional representations of authors. So I actually love reading books about writers and watching stuff about writers, although it's nearly always very inaccurate if it's on TV or film. But she just kind of has the perfect life. You know, she's just like very successful. She just goes around having fun and solving crimes, and it just seems like the perfect life, really.
It does, but I don't think I'd want to sit next to her on a coach or live next door to her. Cabot Cove is gorgeous. I'm not sure I could live there.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. Would you be tempted to set something in Maine?
In Maine? I've never actually been, so I might go this year. I'm going to Canada with my partner. He's Canadian, and we are planning to travel down to New York, so we may be able to go. I would love to go because I've read Stephen King since I was very young, too young actually. So yeah, I would love to go to that part of New England. But so far I never have. So this is going to be my first time, I think, this year. So
I'm always fascinated when people say they read Stephen King too young, because so many people do. I didn't read The Shining until it's actually
Oh, yeah.
I didn't read it until I think I must have been late 20s, early 30s. I'm not quite sure. I could have been mid 20s. And I couldn't read it past lunchtime because if I did, I didn't sleep that night.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of have a cut off. I've never had that happen before or since.
Yeah, I read my first Stephen King when I was 9. So
Wow. Which
my
one? Can you remember?
Cujo was Cujo.
Oh my word.
And
Okay.
my mum was very strict about what I was allowed to watch on TV. Like, I wasn't allowed to watch Neighbours. I wasn't allowed to watch Grange Hill at one point because it was like a teen pregnancy storyline. But I was usually allowed to read anything I wanted. And we had a very small local library because I grew up in like rural Ireland, mid troubles. You know, there was not much public funding around for books. So I never had enough books, and there was no bookshop in the town. Obviously, no Kindles at that point. So I was just always constantly starved of reading material. And they eventually had to let me read the adult books, even though that wasn't allowed. You weren't even supposed to read the teenage books if you were still at primary school. But they had to make an exception because I'd read everything. So I just
You are the living embodiment of Matilda.
Yeah, but then I read this and I don't remember being that scared by Cujo, but I remember I got it from, I think it was like my 13th birthday, and I was so scared by that I had to put it aside for like a year before I could finish it. And actually, I haven't read any Stephen King for quite a while now. I should probably go back and like fill in some gaps.
I suppose the thing with books instead of TV is if you're reading something and you don't like it, you can stop. You do not have to read the rest of the scene if it's awful. But with a film, I always say to my kids, you can't unsee things. Be careful what you watch. You can't unsee it.
That's true.
From the things that I watched as a younger. It's probably why I wasn't picking up scary books, because there was a particular friend where when I stayed there, it would be, you're all right watching this, aren't you? And little 9-year-old me going, oh, yes, it's fine. And no, it was not fine. But I hope my mum doesn't watch this interview in particular.
I used to hide behind the sofa. Like my brother really liked Indiana Jones, and I would find Temple of Doom really, really scary when they would eat the eyeballs and stuff. So I used to hide behind the sofa when that came on.
I still now watch Stranger Things like this. The second time I'll watch it, but I don't like jump scares and I don't like weird distorted faces.
I do quite like horror.
Funnily enough,
I never get to watch horror because I never like had a partner that wanted to watch horror films, so I hardly ever watch them. But I do enjoy them quite a bit.
Yeah, no, I'm not good. I can read horror. I read a brilliant book recently by one of our admins, Will Templeton. He's got a book called Mr. Nice, and it's a novella, about 200 pages. Absolutely brilliant. But if that was on a screen, I would not have been able to watch it. So I think there's definitely a disjointed love of horror. Can't see it.
Sharon Bolton's books are really scary too. Like I've definitely, after reading some of hers, I've like got up and checked the door is locked. So
yeah, her books are something that there'll be a certain scene that will give me nightmares for months.
Yeah, and I would literally like get up and check when the windows closed after reading that.
Excuse me.
I also read, one time in my teens, I was reading Red Dragon, the prequel to Silence of the Lambs, and I was looking after my younger brother and sister, and we were staying in this house on a mountain in Ireland on our holidays, and I think I was probably 14 or so, and I was reading this book which is about someone that breaks into houses and kills families. So that was that was pretty terrifying. Also,
poor reading choice for that particular night. But did you stop reading?
No, I definitely finished it. Yeah.
That night, though, did you stop reading while you were babysitting, or
no? I don't think so. No,
just carrying on.
Yeah.
Have there been any books that have scared you?
Definitely that one, and definitely the first time I read it. Yeah, I was very terrified. Probably not for a while actually. I'm not sure if I've read much horror really. I probably should go back. Yeah.
It's hard though, as I said, when we are asked to read lots and lots of things, and there's so much going on with writing and day jobs that it's impossible, isn't it, sometimes to be able to just pick up the thing that you are really wanting to read.
I think I've got in a habit of just reading a lot of like psychological thrillers, which are usually gripping but not usually scary as such. So yeah, I'd be interested in some recommendations of something that really kind of think also you get a
Everything
bit jaded.
scares
You
me.
read a lot of crime, so maybe you just get a bit like, oh yeah, here we go. It's another murder.
Being such an avid reader, does that help or hinder you when it comes to the writing process? Because you must have seen a lot of things. You must be able to pick up books and see a pattern forming.
Yeah.
So,
So
being able to not do that in your own books, is that difficult? Is it easier because you kind of know, well, other people have done this, I'm going to do something completely different?
I think on the whole it's pretty helpful because you see all the different ways that people structure books and tell stories.
Mm.
And you think, oh well, that's I could do it that way, or I could do it this way. You do get quite good at guessing where things are going. So a couple of times I've had a book and I've sort of had a very strong feeling about that page 3 where it was going, and I'll sometimes check, and if I'm right, it's always quite disappointing to be able to get it that soon what the twist is. I think it's hard to enjoy because I write scripts as well, so it's quite hard to enjoy things in a sort of innocent way. Like you're always kind of thinking, oh, I would have done it that way, or I would have done it this way. Or, so it's a nice
Why
feeling.
did you Sorry,
You can
why
see
did you decide to leave the book just in the parts and no chapters? It didn't bother. I didn't realise for quite a while because I'd picked it up and I was reading away, and I'd read quite a lot before I realised there weren't any chapters. And I think it was only because I'd had to, one of the kids shouted at me and had to put it down for a minute. And then when I came back to it, I realised how many pages I'd read and gone, oh, and I hadn't hit the second part yet, so I hadn't realised.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting choice. I was trying to think if there are other books I can think of that are in parts but without chapters, and I couldn't think of one. But
It's funny, because I
I
often
don't
don't
know. I think
enjoy
I always
books that,
assumed.
yeah, so
Sorry, I
often
think I always assumed they'd be really important, but actually, it
mhm.
turns out not that important in the right book.
Yeah, I often find it annoying in books if you get a huge chunk from one character and then move to someone else. It can feel quite jarring. That I have done that myself. So
And it wasn't
um,
jarring.
one book that so Sharon, actually one of Sharon Bolton's books does this. I think it's called Little Black Lies, and Erin Kelly did it in one of her books, Stone Mothers, or We Know You Know. I think it was retitled as. I don't. I always have this thing when I'm starting a new book is I'm just sort of waiting to figure out what the structure is going to be. So, who are the viewpoints? How is it going to work? Do they have chapters? Do they have sections? And with this one, I just wanted it to be kind of a bit like a wheel, where it's like you get Helen's point of view, you get George's point of view, which is contradicting a lot of hers. Then we get back into the past and find out what really happened, and then we get back to Helen to find out the kind of denouement. And then there's like a little extra bit at the end where there's a bit more of a twist.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just seemed to me that this is how this story needed to be told.
I think Little Black Lies was the first Sharon Bolton book that I read, and then I was hooked after that.
It's really good. So
but yeah,
it's
so disturbing.
Falklands. Yeah, and she's never been to the Falklands. I was astonished by that.
I'm astonished by that.
It just seems so vivid, like her portrayal of this. So.
I'm always amazed how writers can do that. So I'm going to go to. We've not really talked about Helen and George yet because we have a little bit at the beginning, but I'm so keen to not give anything away that the first thing I'm just going to do is pick on George's packing. So I made a note that said, the way George haphazardly packed up their home for the big move almost brought me out in hives. So it makes me wonder how you felt writing that. Are you organised? Are you chaotic? Are you somewhere in between? It was quite nice seeing Helen, know he was going to ask for certain things and have them.
Yeah.
That was a really, really nice touch that really did show their bond connection and their lives together. Just such a little simple thing that said so much in about 5 words.
Yeah. I think that a lot of where this book came from is actually the idea of how awful it is to buy a fixer-upper house. So never mind the witchcraft and the murders, it's really about the horrors of moving into a house that's very run down. And when I was writing it, I hadn't had that. I'd bought a house a couple of years ago and it was fine. And I had a few friends that had bought like some really shocking places and also had a terrible time with the renovations. And I was thinking a lot about how like you trust builders and you give them keys often. And sometimes people end up with a very toxic relationship with their builders, like almost afraid of them. So I kind of wanted it to be a bit like that, the sense of being invaded, having people in your house, and maybe the house itself kind of attacking people almost, because people start having accidents. Um, so it kind of came from that, and then I did end up moving house myself, also into a kind of a fixer-upper. It's not that bad, you can see it's not too bad, but it's funny because all of that kind of came true, and yeah, my partner is not the most organized, so I'm the one that has like 10,000 lists, and we've got to, here's all the things we have to sort, here's all the things we have to clean, and yeah, I actually don't think I did any work for about 2-3 months when we moved. It was a lot to get it all sorted.
It's not an easy thing to pack up your life and move house. I'm assuming you didn't find anything in the walls though.
Not so far, no. I mean, we haven't done the renovation yet, but there's a lot of weird choices were made in the making of this house. But so far, nothing spooky that I found. Just like quite weird things, like they'd taken away the extractor hood, so there's just a gap in the wall and things like that. Yes, it's definitely me that's organized. I'm definitely the Helen who's very overly organized, control freak, and for her to let him buy the house, she hasn't even seen the house. I needed to make that plausible that she would do that. But actually, when you buy stuff at auction, you often don't see it, I believe, or I thought that it was plausible that she could just be so taken up with her job that she would trust him and then get there and be like, oh my god, what has he done? This place is a real dump.
I think because she was so unbelievably busy, so burnt out, she'd had this horrific time at work because the world was burning around us. It felt like sometimes, and it really did make it believable.
Mm-hmm.
It really did make it plausible. It meant that some of the choices and decisions and things that she did or didn't do for various reasons, all of that fed from she's just coming back out into the world. She's just kind of getting to catch her breath, and all of these things haven't been on her mind. So
Yeah.
it was completely plausible. None of it felt unrealistic. Even when you kind of kicking, kind of thinking, they should be kicking themselves here. Why are they acting in this way? It's for
Mm-hmm.
a reason, and it is a really plausible reason, which is really, really hard to get right.
Yeah.
So you've obviously thought a lot through that. Laura
Yeah.
said she saw a documentary that looked at the women's cases. One of the
Mm-hmm.
excuses given was the RUC was busy due to the troubles. Laura is from, I believe you're from Northern Ireland, Laura. Um, Pretty sure she is. And
Yeah.
that's heartbreaking because, as you said, if there's not money for things, they're going to put the money into. They're making choices, aren't they? And these choices affect people's
Yeah.
lives, basically.
In this case, most of them were actually in the south of Ireland. So, sorry, did I freeze there? Yeah. So
Just
most of these
briefly, but I
cases were
can
around
still hear
Dublin.
you. Mm.
Oh yeah, I can still hear it. My screen's going dark. I'm not sure why that's happening. So yeah, so it was mostly the southern police that this is about, like the Gardaí, but definitely a lot of the cases, like there's definitely a lot of issues with the border as well. And that is one issue in itself. Actually, it was like one small island with two different police forces that just didn't talk to each other. And I did look at another case of a girl that went missing, who was from Northern Ireland, and she'd crossed the border for a night out and gone missing. And that one was really bungled by the RUC. Like it was pretty obvious. It was very obvious who'd killed her because the man who gave her a lift home had already abused loads of young girls, and then he murdered another young girl a couple of years later and went to prison. So it was definitely him, but they just completely bungled it so much. So
Things like this must just haunt people involved and people kind of from the surrounding area for such a long time. And obviously, I think when you go into fiction instead, you can, as we said earlier, you can have the satisfaction of a closed story. You can leave an open ending if you wish, but you can also tie everything up or almost everything up and still find a really satisfying ending. How do you feel reading crime fiction that is open ended? It's quite a controversial subject sometimes,
yeah,
but I quite like mine to be closed unless it's a series or part of a series.
I think it can only really work if somebody is very, very skillful, and if that's sort of the point of the book. So there's a book I really loved called A Dark Adapted Eye, which is a Barbara Vine novel. That was Ruth Rendell's pen name. She wrote thrillers under that name. And it's about, it's quite old now. I think it was published in the 80s, but it's about a woman. The main character is just, she has nothing to do with it. She's just narrating it. It's a story about her aunts. One of her aunts had murdered the other and been hanged for it. And nobody really knew why in the family. So the whole book is just her going back through her childhood and her life and trying to figure out why did this happen. And you actually never really find out. And there's loads of things in the book that just aren't answered, but that's because she doesn't know. So that really works because it's just like this frustration of we will never know because they're both dead. And the narrator does not know any more than we do. So I think that works brilliantly. And I've read that book maybe 10 times. Like, it's just so kind of draws you back again and again, almost hoping to be the one that cracks the case, even though it's not possible. So I think it's pretty hard to pull off. Most of the time, I think readers really want stuff to be answered, and me included in that. Because if the whole book is about, if the whole reason you're reading is to find out the answer to something, and you don't find out the answer, then that's just really disappointing. So, but I read another book. There's a book called Something Might Happen by Julie Myerson, who's a literary novelist, and that's about a murder and its kind of aftermath, and that doesn't get solved, but that works as well because it's not a crime novel. It's just about how awful murder is and the terrible impact that it has on people.
So Laura is saying the point horror's about a haunted doll. She had a porcelain doll. She was turned around, thinks she's still there facing the wall in my old childhood bedroom.
Yeah, point horrors were really good. Those were like really punchy, great ideas, short, really well written, really gripping. Yeah, they were good ones.
I would show you my point horror collection, but one of my children now has it in their bedroom.
There was a really good series about a writer, like a horror writer or a crime writer. I think there was Christopher Pine was the author of those.
Okay, yeah.
Christopher Pine. Those are brilliant. Yeah, I really, really like those.
It's been a long time. I mean, even when one said stopped reading kind of YA, they were books that I still carried on reading for a while until my son nicked them all. And now I've got no chance of getting near them. Laura's also read Clara and the Sun recently, and that had no chapters. She said it was a little weird to begin with. Was it so not having chapters was a little weird to begin with, Laura? And hello, Leslie, who's joined us. Yeah, I mean, like I say, if I hadn't had to stop, I don't think I'd have noticed that there weren't any chapters because I was just so involved in Helen. And it wasn't until I got to George that I'd come back to the book and I was like, oh, been reading for, I think it was a lot of pages I'd been reading for.
Yeah, I think it's probably about 100 pages or 80 pages or something for each section.
I was thinking about 80.
Yeah. And actually, I will have planned that out quite exactly because I get really hung up on like my structural maths when I do books. So if I have lots of like interwoven voices, they have to be either A B A B A B or they have to be like A B A B A B C A B A B A B C. So I do get quite hung up on that, even though I'm sure no one else notices except me. So.
Do you spend a long time working that out before you start, or is that something that you kind of work out as you go along?
I have to work things out as I go along. Yeah, I'm always kind of, as I'm writing, just thinking like, so the new one I've just started out, still don't really know how that's going to work, and I'm just sort of noodling along with it. And
so no preconceived ideas before you get going. You just kind of start with the first idea.
Yeah, so I have to pitch something to my publishers, which is usually like 1 or 2 pages. So, but then I quite often change that as well. I will sort of say sometimes, all right, this is what I'm thinking, but this may change, and then stuff does change in the writing quite often.
Laura's just saying it was hard to judge when to stop and find a page break, and she's originally from Derry, she said. I didn't think with yours, I will say, Laura, if you've not read this one yet, because you have the scene breaks, I think there are quite natural places to stop if you need to.
Yeah.
So I don't think really makes any difference that there's no chapters. I'm honestly kind of surprised I even noticed in the end. It was purely because, as I say, I picked it up and realised that I'd been reading for a while.
Yeah.
So I really don't think it mattered. I wonder without the scene breaks, would that make it trickier? But still, probably not, because it just works.
Yeah, it's something I find tricky myself sometimes, but I kind of wanted to use that feeling of like big chunk like racing towards the end, and then you get a very abruptly pulled into someone else's point of view, because it's
Which
supposed to
is
be about
yeah,
all these secrets and everyone kind of lying to each other to some extent.
I really do love it when it's in a book, when it's secrets and lies and things coming up from the past and how things tie together. It
Yeah,
really is fascinating.
I
It
really
must be
wanted
for
to have
you
like,
writing it.
yeah, I really wanted it to have like a big twist as well at the end of everything, where that was suddenly like, oh my god. So
We haven't yet talked about the fact that 20th of June was your publication day. So did you celebrate that in any way? Or were you doing this kind of thing, interviews and...
well, I'd had another book out 2 weeks before, and I'd had a launch party for that, so I didn't do too much. I went to someone else's book launch on the 20th, and then I had some dinner afterwards. It's a small celebration, but yeah, it was the book launches seem to be really coming back now. I think they've sort of gone away for a bit, not just because of COVID, but even before that. But people seem to be having them much more again now, which is nice.
It is nice. It's really nice to go and see somebody just really enjoy that moment, that day, and get to celebrate this huge achievement, because I think sometimes we underestimate just how much work goes into one book.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
it's
it's really
easy
important to take a moment, and I'm really bad at that myself. I always like just rush on to the next one. So it's really good to just take a moment and think, yeah, it's finally a real book.
Any TV interest at the moment? Can I ask that?
Yeah, from the not in this one yet. I have a couple of books that are in production, or not production, in development. So I have my crime series, which is about a forensic psychologist in Northern Ireland. That's in development. What You Did is also in development, and so is The Vanishing Triangle for a documentary. So that's all at the minute, but yeah, always a possibility.
And what about any other events that you're going to be at? Will people be able to come and meet you in, a bookshop or at an event, maybe buy signed copies?
I'm going to be at Harrogate, so that's where most of the crime writers.
Have you been before?
Catch up, yeah. I think I've been there pretty much every year for the past 10 or 12 years.
Wow.
I might have missed one or two. So I'm going to be doing the Creative Thursday this year, which is the teaching. I teach writing quite a bit, and I used to run an MA in creative writing, so it'll be fun to go and sort of do that strand of it. But it does mean I'm going to be there for a very long time, because I have to go on the Wednesday and don't come back to the Sunday. So.
That is quite a long week.
Yeah.
Other than Harrogate, any others this year?
Nothing else planned in, I don't think. I'll probably pop along to Capital Aquarium as well. That's been really fun the last couple of years. So yeah, I'm sure I'm not scheduled to do anything, I don't think, but I'll be there probably. Yeah, that's about it. Most of the time I just kind of have my head down, just working away. And there used to be a lot more bookshop events, and not so much anymore. But I think actually it's quite hard to get people to go to book events. I think people who like to read don't necessarily like to go out and do things. So
this is the tricky thing, isn't it? It's finding the balance, finding the readers who are chatty. And if you I was talking to Sheila Bugler about this last night. If you're quite anxious about going out anyway, and then you look at going into a room full of strangers, that's so full of noise and lights, and and so many people, and is it going to get really warm? How am I going to feel when I'm there? But actually, book events, once you get there, are really welcoming and friendly. Lots of people go on their own.
Yeah, like definitely for festivals and stuff are really, really friendly. Also, if anyone's like an aspiring writer, I always advise them to go to the festivals, because it's just such an amazing chance to meet agents and editors, and knowing quite a few people that have ended up getting published as a result of that. But in terms of for the writer doing events, it's not always worth it, I think, unless you're like a really, really big name, because it's quite hard to get people to come to things, and it feels like quite a lot of your time, and it's very different sort of energy than we're used to, you know, being like sort of projecting and chatting to those people, whereas most of us just like to sort of sit alone in a room, frown at our computers. So
I did. There was a scene right at the beginning of the book, fairly early on, where Helen walks into the local pub, and she's kind of expecting, you know, a bit of a lunch menu that's a little fancy, and maybe a fire in the corner, and I think you kind of described my ideal pub. Well, maybe not the gastro pub. Quite nice. I like somewhere in between. I think you want the
yeah,
coziness of the fire. It was really nice just kind of walking into a pub with her and just kind of looking around and taking it in through her eyes. And we're going back to
yeah,
what I was saying at the beginning about, you know, the kind of disparity between how you think you'll feel and how things actually turn out. And
yeah,
you know, to be touching on that was
yeah. She's just expecting this like fantasy countryside, I guess, and then it just isn't like that at all. You know, there's really nothing in the village except for like this one pub, which is not really all that welcoming. Turns out there are reasons for that as well, but yeah, just she just finds everyone a bit hostile, and there's like not all the kind of lovely cafes and restaurants that she's expecting.
yeah. So I'm just noticing we've got kind of 8 minutes left. Memorable moments for you so far as an author. This used to be my favourite question, and I found I was asking it in most interviews. So I've not asked anybody this for months
Mm-hmm.
and months. So what stands out for you so far?
I think when you're sort of imagining being a writer, you always have these moments that you think about, and then they don't always pan out that way. Like you always think, oh, I'll go in. So I used to get the train a lot from Charing Cross. Every single day I get the train from Charing Cross out to where I lived, and I would always go into W.H. Smith and have a look and think, you know, my book's going to be there. And then I don't think that's ever happened. I think I've maybe seen one of my books in a shop like only a handful of times, really. So because I'm mostly digitally published now. So it's funny, and then you always think you'll see someone in public reading your book, which also I never have. Although other people have told me they have, but I've never personally never seen it, especially because there's so many people read on Kindle now or read on their phone. One thing that what did happen was I was one of my women's fiction books was published in America, and I got taken over to New York to go to this big book fair, and I walked in and they had like a giant picture of my book cover like hanging in this auditorium, so that was pretty crazy. And then this year at the London Book Fair, I had it was a ban, and again I didn't know this was happening, so I didn't go and see it. But people sent me pictures of a giant banner with my books on it, and also my face.
Wow.
I didn't even realize until I scrolled really in on the photo that my face was also on this banner. So that's kind of funny, things like that. And my next thing is I really want to see a tube poster of some kind, and somebody did send me a picture of an ad for this book on a train in Manchester. So there are some out there in the world. I just haven't seen any yet. But that would be pretty cool. I'd love that. But yeah, I think it just doesn't really look like you think it'll look. Like you imagine you'll have these signing queues and you'll have like all these posters and be kind of famous. And most of it is really just like sitting and typing. But I actually really enjoy that aspect of it as well. So, you know, I often, if I don't have enough time at my desk, I will find myself sort of really just craving the quiet time.
And your books were also given out at Capital Crime last year.
Yeah.
In the tote bags. I do remember that. So that must so when you do publicity and you're looking at all of the kind of all of the chat it generates, that must be quite an unusual but fun thing. You know, when you kind of the reviews start coming in and people are talking about your book and people are sending you pictures of where they've seen it, or is it just a very bizarre thing?
I think it doesn't really happen that much, to be honest. It just I feel like because a lot of my sales are just digital, that I don't know if people get in touch as much as they do with other authors. So I know that they're being sold, and I know that quite a lot of people must be reading them, but I don't always hear from them. So it's always nice to hear from people that it is out there in the world. Otherwise, it can sort of feel a bit like it came out and then it just kind of vanished and dissolved. But
yeah, very, very tricky thing. Does it ever get easier doing this kind of event? So interviews, being on stage, talking to people?
Yeah, definitely. I really enjoy being interviewed because, you know, I don't have to do any work. You have to do all the work, the questions. So yeah, I think everyone enjoys talking about their work. I don't get nervous doing events either, because again, it's just answering questions. And even if I'm chairing events, which I quite like to do, I maybe a little more nervous, but I like that. And I like to try and make sure that it's entertaining and there's a certain sort of skill to it, I think. So yeah, I don't it doesn't feel like having to perform or anything, because it is usually quite informal and just a nice chat.
I think even if you feel like you have to be performing beforehand, as long as you've prepared what you're doing, you kind of forget all of that in the moment, don't you?
Yeah.
All the anxiety, the nerves beforehand, just kind of, you're so focused on what you're doing, you don't really think about it until afterwards.
Like when I'm teaching, I do have to perform a certain amount, because I have to hold people's attention for like a whole day sometimes. So I do find that I get in a very high energy state with that. And I usually really enjoy it, but I'm usually pretty wiped out afterwards and like very hyped up. So I have to kind of get myself in that point. But as long as it's like a good crowd that are responsive, then I usually really enjoy it and time flies by.
So how are you planning to celebrate the next launch, or do you not think about that until it's kind of closer to the time?
Do you know, I'm actually not sure when the next one's coming out. Kind of ridiculous. It's going to be, it'll be sometime next year, but I actually do not know when. I'm going to have to go and check. So yeah, I haven't started thinking about that yet, because I'm still just doing the edit. So it will, it feels like a while away. It'll probably be like at least a year, I would have thought.
So are you on a book each year? Are you writing one each year and releasing one each year?
At least, yeah, I'm doing one every 9 months at the minute for Amazon, and then I always have stuff on the side as well. So like I just had another book came out a couple of weeks ago, which different publisher, different genre, and then I'm also doing kind of scripts and radio stuff, and just always like loads of different side projects. So always busy.
So just so much going on the whole time that I don't know how you have time to kind of sit down and get into the characters and the stuff, because it is very much character led.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously the place is an extra, it feels like an extra character, and there's so many important things going on. But settling into that when you've got so many other things, are you working on the book as a whole and still doing other things at the side?
Yeah, it is hard. Like I've realized that I can't really do more than 2 projects at a time. Otherwise, I just don't make any progress on any of them. So I make that mistake all the time. I'll try and do like 3 things at once, and I'll be like, why is none of this working? I was like, I've got to leave one for now. And I think also people think that you are always writing new stuff, but that's really not the case. Like so much time will be spent editing and doing admin and things like that, that actually the new writing is not every day. So I was writing a new book, and I've got about 10,000 words, and I've had to put it aside so I can do the edits, because I just can't do it on both at once.
We are at 8 o'clock. So I want to thank everyone who's commented and people who are watching, but I really want to thank you, Claire, for coming and joining me. I've waited for this interview for quite a while. I've been hoping to get you on, so it's really, really nice to finally get to talk to you.
Would you? Well, thank you so much for having me. Yes. Oh, sorry, I didn't catch that. You froze a bit.
Yeah, sorry, you've frozen on my screen. So I was going to ask, do you want to talk about the book and I'll hold it up? Oh yeah, you've unfrozen now. There we go.
Yeah, so my fixer-upper from hell story, I guess I would sum it up.
What a good way to describe it that is.
Yeah, moving to Cornwall to your dream house. Turns out not only is it a bit of a nightmare, but it's also not it's not a stranger to you. You've been to that house before, but you don't remember, so you were very small. So yeah, that's my renovation.
It's an absolutely brilliant book.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely brilliant. And thank you for coming to talk to us about it.
Thank you. It's been great.